Thanks everyone for showing up for my Hacking the Hacker, assessing and addressing your organization's cyber defense weaknesses. And I'm hoping to show you how to do that by showing you a little bit how hackers hack and then how you can use that knowledge to help defend against them. I'm Roger Grimes. If you haven't met me before, I've been doing computer security for 34 years. I've written 13 books and over 1,200 magazine articles on computer security. There's some of my books. I'll be covering some of the stuff that I wrote in some of those books here today. It's going to be fast-filled paced. I work for KnowBe4. We're the world's largest security awareness training and simulated phishing platform vendor, which means we try to help you and your coworkers not to get phished. And that's very important because it's the #1 way that hackers and malware hack you. And we'll talk all about that today. We're going to talk about how hackers gather information on you and your organization. And really, again, kind of just show you how hackers hack, the different ways that they hack, and then how you can best defend yourself in your organization. Many times, one of the most frequent questions I get is, well, why did they hack me? And it's usually one of two reasons: that either your company was a victim of opportunity, random target. Hackers are sending out tens of millions of emails every day. They're compromising millions of websites. And on this particular day, you or somebody in your company was just unlucky enough to get tricked, social engineered, and clicking on something or to revealing some information. And that's how they hacked you. That's how most people get hacked. But it also can be because somebody, a human hacker, decided to target you. That does happen, happens more today than it used to happen, but maybe is to the tune of many tens of thousands of years. And victim of opportunity attacks are millions of times a day, far more common. But regardless of how you get hacked, whether it's a victim of opportunity random attack or a human-directed adversary, you defend against both those types of attacks the same way. In general, the hacker methodology, the hacker attack chain, the steps are, if they do all of the steps, is that they will do reconnaissance on you or your organization, trying to learn about it and looking for some type of plan of attack, and eventually decide, hey, I'm going to try to attack this company, this organization this way. They will gain initial access. We'll talk about the different methods they can use for that. And then they'll expand, explore, and exploit further and decide what they want to do next. And eventually they're going to execute their goal, whatever it was, ransomware or stealing money or something like that. And certainly not all hackers do all steps, but if they do all the steps, this is kind of the hacker methodology that they will use. And again, usually it's also one of three ways that it occurs. It can be, a lot of times it's because of automated malware, that you got tricked into running a Trojan horse program, or it was a computer worm or a virus or something like that. Again, it can also be because of a human adversary, but these days, more often than not, it was the initial access, the initial compromise happened because of some malware, with an email phishing attack or something. And then that malware, we say, dials home and lets the hacker know that they've compromised this particular environment, and then the hacker comes in and takes over. That's how most hacking happens today. It's kind of a hybrid combination of both. And very much like what I'm getting ready to show you, the typical attacker workflow is that somebody's connected to the internet. They usually get tricked into executing what we call a stager Trojan horse program that then modifies their device so it can live through a reboot. Typically then it will collect passwords that it can find on that device, and then it will contact its command and control servers over the internet. And those servers, the hackers will monitor those command and control servers and get a list of all the different things, all the different compromised victims, and the hacker can tell the malware program what to do. Typically, the malware will download other malware programs, tell it to spread in different places around the organization, steal passwords, as many passwords as they can get. The malware update itself so it stays ahead of the antivirus program so that they're not, scannable. Eventually, the hacker will log into the command and control servers, and they get a list of all the new compromised victims, usually by network name, IP address, and host name. So usually from those three pieces of information, the hacker can kind of figure out what type of company or organization that they've broken into this time. And then the hacker logs in remotely to the target and starts to, usually they upload scripts, and they start doing things like eavesdropping on email, installing other malicious scripts and programs, and kind of deciding what they want to do to that particular company. Many times they're in the company for many weeks to months, called dwell time, all without being detected. The hackers come in, analyze assess the target, and then steal whatever they want, emails or data or passwords or whatever it is. And then if they're ransomware, maybe they implement some ransomware program. But that, how I described it today, this typical attacker workflow, again, is probably how 86 to 90% of all attacker malware combinations work today. It's this combination of initial access gained through some type of Trojan horse program, or maybe because the person has unpatched software and has a vulnerability they haven't patched, or it could be because the attacker knows their password. One of those three ways, the most common ways that they get in. Although by far, since the beginning of the computers, the two most likely ways that hackers and malware get in are social engineering and unpatched software. Social engineering is involved in about 70 to 90% of all successful malicious data breaches. Unpatched software is involved in about 20 to 40%. And then there's usually a third thing. Social engineering and unpatched software have been the number one, number two ways that hackers and malware break in for the entirety of computers. The third thing kind of changes. These days, it's password attacks, where the attacker either knows your password, has socially engineered your password, or they can guess at your password. Those two or three things altogether account for 90 to 99% of all hacks. Everything else you can think of altogether only account for 1 to 9%, 1 to 10% of attacks in the average organization. It really is. If you want to stop hackers and malware, you better stop social engineering and patch your software and take care of your password issues. And we'll talk more about that at the end. But if you're going to defend yourself against hackers and malware, you need to first think like a hacker. So we're going to kind of cover it both ways and give you a couple of examples of what hackers do. But again, typically, if it's going to be this human adversary, hacker that's trying to break into you or your organization, they're going to try to gather as much information on the intended target as possible, typically using what's called open source intelligence, or OSINT. They're going to try to find out what information they can find using Google and things like that. They're going to try to enumerate, what company assets you have, what networks you're using, what types of devices, what type of operating systems, usernames, email addresses, any trusted third-party relationships, anything they can use to try to break into you, they will. And again, they many times will use what's called open source intelligence. There's hundreds of these open source intelligence tools out there anybody can download. You can even go to a GitHub website called Awesome OSINT and see them all. And I recommend that you download a few, try to see how much, and try to see if you can find out how much information about your company or organization is on the internet. Because let me tell you, there's a ton of stuff you can use, and at least you should understand what's out there on the internet about you and your organization. You shouldn't just let hackers be the only one that's trying to see what's out there. If you're lucky, sometimes you can get some of it erased, but here's an example, another Awesome OSINT site called Awesome Hacker Search Engines, and it just has a list of like 100 different search engines, to download exploits, to break into people's companies, or to find people's email addresses. I use a lot of those actually when I want to contact company CEOs. Sometimes I want to write a letter and tell them, a complaint or something, and they never tell you what the CEO's email address is. So I go find it using open source intelligence tools. A really common open source intelligence tool that hackers can use to find information about your company is called ReconNG. It's, again, a free downloadable tool off of GitHub and other places. But essentially, you just literally put in the company's domain name that you want to investigate, like KnowBe4.com. And then there's all kinds of, in this case, this picture shows you 81 recon modules, reconnaissance modules. And you can look up things like email addresses, login names, passwords. That's a tool that a lot of hackers use. And again, I think everybody should run in that against their own company's domain to see what you find. Another common OSINT tool that hackers like to do is called the Harvester. And it gathers things like emails, email addresses, device names, operating systems, open ports and banners, anything that will give you a lot of information as a hacker you can use against the company. A really popular tool is Nmap, Network Mapper. It's been around for at least 2 decades. And a hacker or anybody can run this against somebody's domain, and it will tell you all the different, not only open ports that might be accessible from the internet, but more importantly, tell you the operating systems involved or the applications involved and the versions. The version numbers are very important because that will tell you whether or not the person has it patched. And let me say, in my 34 years doing security and looking at millions of devices, I've never found a fully patched anything in my life. Nmap is one of the things that tells me. that I have found unpatched stuff. There's even a lot of special hacking tools, like in this case, I'm showing you Nick2, that literally you fire that off against a website and it will tell you all the possible exploits and vulnerabilities that are in a website, tell you what type of website it is, what version it is, and tell you exactly what you can exploit. And there's hacker tools for websites and databases and email engines and so on and so on. Cisco routers, you name it, somebody's built a hacking tool that will tell you how to hack it. And here's an example of like Nick2 on the screen here that's finding a vulnerability, a PHP vulnerability in somebody's database. And it's kind of interesting. They're saying that this suggests the host is vulnerable to the XST vulnerability because of some problem that they had with configuring PHP. And again, you don't have to be a hacker genius. They're telling you exactly the problem they found, and then all you have to do is exploit that. You can even look on the internet. If somebody has something that's publicly accessible from the internet, you can rent a service, buy a service, subscribe to a service like Shodan, that literally you put in a vulnerability like, oh, you have this particular vulnerability that you have or know about or can exploit, and Shodan will tell you all the publicly accessible sites in the world that have servers that are vulnerable to, like in this particular example, somebody was searching for a vulnerability for what's called Big IP. Big IP is a type of network equipment, what was called an open redirect on Big IP. And you can see there's some company names right there. There's IP addresses and company names. And if you're an attacker, you can start to take advantage of those vulnerabilities right away. And this used to be a free, Shodan used to be a free service. Now you got to pay a subscription fee, but it really isn't a whole lot. And again, it lets you find vulnerabilities all around. Here's another one where they're finding another common vulnerability, what's called common vulnerability exposure from 2014. So this is, and that secondary example, it's a vulnerability since 2014, and there's over 100,000 people that are still exploitable using that particular vulnerability, the Heartbleed vulnerability. You would think that Heartbleed would be closed by now since it's been over 6-7 years, but nope, there's plenty of it out there that anybody, good or bad intended, can take advantage of. Hackers will also look for unprotected online portals where they can do password guessing against. A lot of times it's email portals, but it could be VPN portals. But basically, if they're going to try to guess login names and passwords, they need to find one that's unprotected, that's not protected by MFA, that they can guess against. And you can do what's called Google hacking. Like in this example, I wanted to find out if there are any websites locatable on the internet that used Active Directory Federated Services. And that's because Active Directory Federated Services oftentimes is an older product. It's usually not patched, and it's not usually well monitored. And when I did this search, you can look at the bottom of the screen, I found Tesla. So Tesla, if I was a Tesla employee and I went to log on in, Tesla requires multi-factor authentication to log into the Tesla corporate account. But I found an API, an ADFS API that was unprotected on Tesla that, if I was a hacker, I could start to take advantage of. So they call that Google hacking, where you just can go search and try to find things and unpatched software and vulnerabilities just by doing a little bit of Googling. But typically the hacker is going to try to find some exploitable, unpatched thing, like, oh, they're using, Internet Information Server, version 7, it's unpatched. Well, there's literally dozens to hundreds of websites that have exploitation databases like exploit-db. It contains over 44,500 exploits. That you can just say, oh, I need a Microsoft exploit, I need a Windows exploit, I need an Apache exploit, I need an Apple exploit. You can literally just go look in these databases, then download these vulnerabilities. Sometimes you have to compile them, sometimes you run them in a scripting image like Python script that then attacks the thing that you've identified using those other tools I talked about the different vulnerable services. So that is a really, really common way that you can be compromised, which is, again, someone, a hacker looking for, identifying some unpatched vulnerability or service, running tools identifying that, downloading the exploit, and then running it against the thing. But probably the most common way is using social engineering. We talked about, remember, social engineering, unpatched software, number one. Number two way to compromise somebody. Even if you're using what's called multi-factor authentication, a lot of people get told, oh, use MFA, it stops 99% of attacks. That is not true, has never been true. But here's a really common multi-factor bypass hack that uses social engineering, and it works against probably 90–95% of all multi-factor authentication out there. But it begins with a hacker sends a phishing email to a potential victim, and that email looks like it's coming from a legitimate service, Microsoft or Google or LinkedIn or something like that. And if the user doesn't realize that the link that it contains is rogue, is bad, and they click on it, what happens is that instead of it connecting them directly to what they thought they were going to, the legitimate website, it connects them to what's called a man-in-the-middle rogue transparent proxy website, which is a hacker website that then connects them to the victim to what they thought they were going to in the first place. But then there's this man-in-the-middle website so that everything that the victim types in, their login name, their password, an MFA code or something like that, can be taken by the hacker and used against the victim, and anything the website sends back to the victim can be captured by the hacker. If you ever successfully log onto a website, you're always going to be sent back what's called an access control token cookie, which is kind of like, hey, you've logged in, here you are, this is your identity, this is your driver's license, you can be on this website. But the hacker can get that and then use it against the person. So they'll actually capture that access control token cookie, disconnect the victim, and then log in as the victim. And I'm going to show you a video that does that right now. I forget whether it's me or Kevin Mitnick's voice in this video, but Kevin's going to show you how to do a man-in-the-middle website that bypasses multi-factor authentication. So stand by for just a second. So here we are on an inbox, a regular looking inbox, and one of those emails has a phishing email. Kevin's going to click on it. It looks like just a normal email from somebody saying, hey, let's connect on LinkedIn. But this is a phishing email, and if the victim was looking at the URL, they'd see that it's LLinked.com, not LinkedIn.com. But a lot of people would miss that, think it was from LinkedIn, and then clicked on the button. When they clicked on the button, if they didn't realize it was taken to the wrong place, if you look up in the top hand side there, it's LLinked, not LinkedIn. But really what this is a man-in-the-middle website that's capturing when the victim types in their login name and password. And even LinkedIn is going to prompt the victim to input their MFA credentials after they put in their login name and password. But really what the victim is connected to is a man-in-the-middle website that is capturing all that information, the login name, the password, and the multi-factor authentication code that they type on in here. So the person gets sent the code, they type it in, they think they're putting it to the real website, but really it's a fake website that's capturing it. And if you look behind the scenes there, the hacker, using their hacking tool behind the scenes, has captured the login name and password. The victim is actually in on the real website right now. It has passed them through to the real website. But this is what the hacker captures. You can see email address, password, and what's called the access control token cookie. They could have, if they wanted to, captured that 4 or 6-digit code that they typed on in, but they really, in this particular case, don't even need it because they have the website's cookie. Every time someone logs in successfully, whether it includes MFA or not, the website will send back a cookie that basically says, hey, you've been approved, you authenticated. The hacker can capture that and then paste it into their browser. So here is an example. Kevin is going into his browser, going to the LinkedIn real website. He's not even going to try to log in as the user with their login name and password. He's simply going to inject the stolen cookie into his browser session. He's doing it right here. He's going to open up the admin console, the developer console, copy that stolen cookie into his browser, and simply refresh his browser, and he will be logged in as the victim. And there is the attacker on the real website and as the victim. And this sort of attack would work against probably 90–95% of multi-factor authentication today. So pretty wild if you've never seen that before. And what I say in general, the defense is try to avoid any MFA solution that can be easily socially engineered or man-in-the-middle around using a man-in-the-middle website. Unfortunately, probably 90–95% of MFA that people use are susceptible to that man-in-the-middle attack. what I try to tell people is that whatever MFA that you're using, you should educate your users about what the MFA does, how it works, what it can't do, what it can't protect against. And probably the most important part is the common possible attacks for that type of MFA and how to recognize them and avoid them. Like in this particular example in the past, you could just tell the end user, hey, just be aware that it's common for scammers to send you phishing emails that have fake links and you think you're going to the right place, but it isn't. So you have to pay attention and hover over the URL before you click on it and make sure you're going to the right place. That would help prevent those sort of attacks. And you should do that for whatever MFA solution you have, which is educate people, again, about the types of attacks and how to avoid them. So I've talked about how hackers hack you, the social engineering and looking for vulnerabilities that are unpatched and that sort of stuff. So how do you defend yourself? Well, here you go. And if you're falling asleep, pay attention here because this is the best advice you'll ever receive. Number one, do everything you can not to be tricked by social engineering, whatever it takes. Remember, 70 to 90% of all successful attacks involve social engineering, and anything you can do using policies and technical defenses and education to stop people from being fooled by social engineering is the best thing you can do. Also, patch your internet accessible software. 20 to 40% of all attacks involve unpatched software that the hacker then takes advantage of using some of the methods I showed you today. So make sure you patch your software, and especially anything that's on the CISA, the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA.gov. They keep something called the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog. Any vulnerability on that catalog is something that real-world attackers are using against real-world companies. There's a whole bunch of patches every year. Like last year, there's over 20,000 things that had to be patched. CISA has said that less than 4% of all those patches are ever used by any real-world attacker against any real-world target. And CISA has a list. You can subscribe to it, and they'll tell you what is being attacked by real-world hackers. And if you have software or firmware that's on that list, make sure you get it patched. Also think you need to use phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication wherever you can to protect valuable data and systems. And again, if you don't know what I mean by phishable and non-phishable, it was talking about using MFA that is not susceptible to man-in-the-middle attacks. And a lot of people say, well, what isn't? Well, I got a list. If you go to my LinkedIn list here of known good MFA, I will tell you exactly what MFA is phishing resistant. And you should use phishing resistant MFA whenever you can to protect yourselves. You're not going to be able to use MFA everywhere. You're going to have to use passwords. And wherever you use passwords, you should use really good passwords. A really good password is a 12-character fully random password, which is unguessable, uncrackable by any known adversary we know. If you create your own password, unfortunately, you're going to have to create a 20-character or longer passphrase or something like that. I have friends that routinely break 18-character passwords all the time for a living. They're not even, they're not as powerful as the nation state. So I really recommend that you use a password manager, because password managers create really long and random passwords that are different for every website and service. So I think you should use a password manager. But even if you don't, your password should be really difficult to guess at or to crack if they've got the password hash. And 12-character fully random or a 20-character human created one. You should also teach yourself, your coworkers, and your family and friends how to spot rogue URLs. Most social engineering attacks include these rogue URLs. And so you should teach yourself. I got some links there. I got a 1-hour webinar there that you can go watch if you want to see like 55 examples of rogue URLs and how you should have known they were rogue. And also got some article and graphics that you can download to teach yourself and other people about how to recognize rogue URLs. Really, of course, you should do everything you can to prevent phishing. I have a 1-hour webinar. If you want to see me talk about everything in my head, it's got 99 slides that how you can defeat phishing. There you go. This 1-hour webinar. If you don't want to be bored with me for an hour, you can read it. I've created basically the same content, everything I can think of to stop phishing in ebook format. I think it's like 46 pages long or something like that. Choose your poison. But both of these cover every policy, technical defense, and best practice education thing that you should do to try to stop phishing, which is really important because phishing is involved in 70 to 90% of all successful attacks. And KnowBe4, we're very big believers in training and testing people to make them less likely to click on a phish, what we call phish prone. We know for sure that if you train your people, you should give everybody good cybersecurity training when they get hired, and at least once a year thereafter. Everybody should get this longer cybersecurity training, maybe 15, 30, 45 minutes, an hour, at least once a year. And then every month thereafter, they should have shorter training, 1, 2, 3, 5 minutes of training. And you should at least monthly do simulated fishing, where you test how well they understood what you trained them. And if people failed the simulated fishing, they should get more training until they stop failing your simulated fishing test so much. Our customers that do that, the average person that comes to us, the number of employees that will click on a phishing email, any phishing email, is around a third. And after you do what we talked about, which is training in simulated phishing at least once a month and this longer thing annually, all of our customers get it down to around 5% within a year. And since that's the number 1 way that you can be hacked, there's nothing you can do better. Thanks for putting up with me for the last 25 minutes. My name's Roger Grimes. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com, and I'll answer any emails you send my way. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And with that, thanks, and continue to fight the good fight.